I'm Lior Phillips, host of This Must Be the Gig. We're a weekly podcast that documents everything about the world of live music, speaking with choreographers, costume and set designers, the people who run beloved venues and festivals, and, of course, speaking with musicians about that one gig that changed their lives. Get your peek behind the curtain at consequenceofsound.net, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with the interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sounds, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Big thanks to all the subscribers for checking out all the multiple episodes we put out every single week. Love hearing your comments in the various places you can do that, whether you're giving the series a review or just saying hi, something you liked about the interview. I always love hearing from you. Keep doing that. If you haven't given the series a rating, that's always helpful as well. And if you're not a subscriber, what are you waiting for? New interviews released Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It is the best way to keep up with what all of your favorite artists are up to these days. So on your preferred listening device and wherever you get your podcast downloaded from, just type in Kyle Meredith with and subscribe, and we'll take care of the rest. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today is a very special interview. Dave Clark of the Dave Clark 5. Dave Clark doesn't get to do a lot. Well, he doesn't do a lot of interviews very often. In fact, it's rare that he even gets to talk about his music. But that's exactly what we're doing today. For the first time in over a decade, the Dave Clark 5 are releasing a new greatest hits compilation. It's called All the Hits. And beyond putting it out on digital and on CD, it's available on vinyl for the first time in decades, like such a long time. So we actually get to talk about the vinyl process. He took it back to Abbey Road to do the remastering and remixing. And then, of course, we'll turn those clocks back, all the way back, 60 years nearly. We'll hear about being at the forefront of rock and roll and what that was like in the moments. Recording 15 albums in 6 years, I mean, that's machine-like quality. But when you consider the hits that came out of that, Glad All Over, Because, Bits and Pieces, Catch Us If You Can, Do You Love Me, I Like It Like That, Any Way You Want It. So we're going to hear about some of those. Glad All Over knocked the Beatles out of the top spot. We'll hear about what that, if there actually was a rivalry that the press painted. The story of him sticking to his guns and fighting the record label to release the ballad Because as its own single and not just a B-side. And the album Coast to Coast. It's a personal favorite of mine. It has Any Way You Want It. Not only great as the original, but was the final song the Ramones ever played live. And then there's a little mystery song at the end of it. It's called Universal Love. This was one that was brought out of the vaults not too long ago, but the story's never really been told on it. But once again, indirectly, there's a bit of a Beatles connection. So let's jump into this, talking about the compilation, All the Hits. It's Kyle Meredith with the Dave Clark 5.
My pleasure, Kyle.
We're talking about All the Hits, the new compilation that's being released. You're back on vinyl again. I mean, this is a big full circle for you, right?
Yeah, that's a trip for me, because all of us from that 60s era, the Beatles and the Stones, everybody, it was vinyl. And I remixed it at Abbey Road, and it's first time 40 years, or longer. It was the 70s, the last vinyl I did.
Now, taking it back and doing the remixing, remastering, I mean, what newness were you trying to pull out of the songs, and did you find anything else in there?
Not really. I mean, it was trying to make sure the quality was right, because technology changes every few years or every decade, to make sure the quality was good for what people use today.
Well, listening to all of these songs, I mean, and especially going back, I mean, few artists can say that they helped create, I don't know, everything, modern rock and roll as we know it, and you were part of that. When you think back, did it feel, in that moment, did it feel like you were doing something brand new?
We tried to get an original sound, no question about that, but if you're talking about breaking barriers, no, at the time we were just in it to enjoy it, and that was what it was, for the fun of playing the music we all enjoyed. But no, it's only going back in time when you look and say, oh, God, I didn't realize I did that. You're just being true to yourself. It's frightening when you look back. I don't know how I did it.
Well, it's amazing to see as much as you all put out in such a. I mean, I think the count was 15 albums or so in basically like 6 or 7 years. I mean, that's a machine-like work ethic. Does it all blend into one, or can you look at those songs and see singular moments in that?
I suppose you can, but looking back, I think we did too many albums. Looking back, because you didn't have that amount of time. You wrote songs. We had our own plane, so you wrote the songs on the plane when you were going from one city to another. Then when you got back to England, you would have maybe 12, 14 songs, and you go and record them, and then you would release 10 or 12. You were limited on time because you were performing all around the world, and you're doing TV and movies and everything else. But it worked. It's looking back, maybe wouldn't have done so many albums. But you can't not what we did. We did it.
Yeah, and amazing songs throughout all of those. I mean, hitting a couple of the big hits right here. Of course, Glad All Over. Famously knocked the Beatles out of that top spot. Was there as much of a rivalry between the bands as history sometimes paints it?
No. I don't know if you ever saw it. We did a documentary for PBS a couple of years ago, and Paul McCartney was on that talking about it. There was no rivalry. It was the press made the rivalry, because they were from Liverpool, we were from London, Tottenham, London, and it was a press rivalry between the north of England and, Liverpool and London. And that's what started it. It wasn't us, and it wasn't the Beatles.
And they're still doing that, the press.
I always thought it was fun. Well, they always will,
Then you have a song like Because, and this is one that found you sticking to your guns. You knew this was a hit when the label wasn't so sure. What did you hear in that song? How did you know that was special?
Well, I made a mistake in England because I did Because to come out after the, I think it was Do You Love Me, Glad All Over, Bits and Pieces, then I wanted Because to come out. And EMI, who was our record label, and I was independent, said, look, Dave, you've had 3 huge hits. Don't do a ballad, do an up-tempo song. And we had a song called Can't You See That She's Mine, but it was on our UK album, and it was already, the album was top 10, it was going for number 1. And I said, well, it will stop us getting a big hit. They said, no, it won't make any difference. So I thought, well, I've been lucky so far, so I agreed with what they wanted, put it on the B-side. And Can't You See it didn't get to number 1, it got top 5, but by then the album was number 1. So when it came to America, by then we'd have more, I think, up-tempo songs. I sent them Because, and they refused to release it. And I said, but I want to release it. And they said no. And I said, well, if you don't release it, you're not going to get any more records. And I got a telegram. In those days, you didn't have emails from the president of Epic Records saying, on your be it, if you release it, you'll ruin your career. You have 48 hours to make your mind up. And I just cabled back and said, release it. And it was a huge hit. But in all fairness, the president wrote me a thing, said I was wrong, congratulations. So that's fine. But if I hadn't been an independent, it would never have seen the light of day.
That's amazing. And it just goes to show, believing in your own music right there. It says so much. Yeah. I will say that, out of all your hits, I'm a huge fan of that song Any Way You Want It, famously the final song the Ramones ever played. Is the album Coast to Coast the unsung masterpiece in the catalog?
I wouldn't know, and that's being totally honest. I'd have to listen to them again. You don't, I don't know. I don't know. We put our heart and soul into it, and, it's down to everybody else to make a judgment,
I'll stamp that one at least on my part. And I will wrap up. I think the most mysterious song on here still to this day is that final track with Universal Love. What's the story on that one? Because that was kind of brought out of the vaults, like a decade ago, right?
Oh, yes. No, it was never released. And I was going through all our past stuff, and I thought, you know what? That is so relevant today as it was then. And I thought it warrants just going on the album as an unreleased track. to say, I think lyrically and that it's what we all cared about in the 60s with the peace and love, and well, the Beatles made that point in some amazing records. And I just thought that was my contribution then, that we never released it because I didn't want people to think we were doing the same message as the Beatles. We all cared, we all wanted peace, and the answer is love, really. It's in this world today, we need more peace and love. They mock John Lennon, but he was so right. It was the way we all felt.
I mean, it's definitely an anthem that needs to be played on repeats, at least over and over these days. Which is amazing that 50 years later that's still the mantra. Amazing and almost unfortunate at the same time, but it's a beautiful song.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Dave, it has been a pleasure talking to you again. All the hits now out on multiple formats, including vinyl. I love hearing all these again. Thank you so much for the music, and thank you for the conversation today.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for playing them.
All right.
Enjoyed.
Take care. Bye. An enormous thanks. Dave Clark of the Dave Clark 5. The new compilation is called All the Hits, and it's available now. And again, thanks to you for checking out the series. As always, I appreciate you making it, especially to the end of the interviews, too. If you're not a subscriber yet, let us bring some magic into your lives through the medium of music interviews. Again, you can subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, Podchaser, any of those places, or wherever you get your podcast from. And hopefully, again, you'll be so inspired to give the series a rating or leave a review or even just say hi in the comment box wherever you're listening from. Always appreciated. And after that, head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, an hour full of song premieres, of music news, anniversary spins, and bonus interviews, too. And again, that's WFPK.org. Consequence of Sound, they've got your music and film news. You can find me on social media, any of the platforms, at Kyle Meredith. And that does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.
It's easy to hear your favorite artist on WFPK from wherever you are. Listen on your smart speaker, live stream from our website at WFPK.org, from Louisville Public Media.